It was a typical weekday morning on the bustling Washington, D.C. subway. The hum of conversation mixed with the faint screech of wheels against the tracks, creating the familiar soundtrack of the morning commute. Passengers jostled for space, their faces a mix of fatigue and focus as they braced for the day ahead. Among the sea of faces stood Emma, a 12-year-old with her backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds dangling from her pocket. Like most teenagers, she seemed unremarkable at first glance, a student on her way to school, quietly lost in her thoughts. But today, Emma's quiet morning would take an unexpected turn. When the subway doors opened, Emma stepped in, scanning for a seat amidst the crowd. Her eyes landed on an empty spot, partially obstructed by a large handbag. She approached with a polite smile, only to be met with a sharp response from Margaret, a middle-aged woman seated beside the bag. "Sorry, it's taken," Margaret snapped, pulling the handbag closer. The tension in the subway car was immediate, palpable, and undeniable. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably, their silence amplifying the moment. Emma, however, stood her ground, calm but resolute, refusing to let the dismissal go unnoticed. Unbeknownst to both Emma and Margaret, this small standoff would become much larger than either of them could imagine. It wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about the everyday moments that expose deep-seated biases and force us to confront them. This is a story about quiet courage, public accountability, and how a seemingly ordinary morning can spark unexpected change. Stay with us as we unravel the moments that followed, the ripple effects that shook two lives, and the lessons that remind us of the power of standing firm. The train screeched to a stop and the doors slid open. Emma stepped into the crowded subway car, her eyes scanning for an open seat. Despite the sea of bodies, her gaze fell on a seemingly available spot between two passengers. A large handbag rested on the seat, its owner, Margaret, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression, seated beside it. Emma approached with a polite smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said softly. "May I sit here?" Margaret barely looked up. "It's taken," she snapped, pulling her handbag closer as if to guard it. Emma blinked, surprised by the abruptness. She glanced around the car. It was clear the seat was empty except for the handbag. Summoning quiet courage, she responded, "There's no one sitting here." Margaret's lips tightened, her voice sharp and defensive. "I said it's taken. Go find another seat." A heavy silence fell over the subway car. The usual hum of movement and quiet chatter was replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. Passengers shifted uneasily, stealing glances at the unfolding scene but saying nothing. Some looked down, pretending not to notice, while others exchanged subtle, knowing glances, a silent acknowledgement of the all-too-familiar dynamics at play. The gust of the wind from the ocean blew up, and Emma didn't argue. She stood there, quiet but unyielding, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about what the moment represented. Her quiet defiance spoke louder than any protest could. The air in the subway car grew heavy with tension, the kind that presses down on everyone, demanding attention. And then, breaking the silence, a voice from across the aisle spoke up. "Mr. President?" "What's the problem here?" asked a man in a calm but firm tone. Margaret turned to him, her irritation evident. "It's my seat. I have the right to decide who sits here." Her words hung in the air, exposing more than she realized. The man raised an eyebrow but didn't reply. Around them, passengers exchanged glances, their discomfort shifting into subtle disapproval. Emma's cheeks burned with a mix of embarrassment and resolve, but she didn't lower her gaze. She stood tall, her quiet strength an unspoken challenge to Margaret's authority over the empty seat. She continued to look out the window. The train lurched forward, yet the moment seemed frozen in time. Then, from across the aisle, a young man shifted in his seat. He pulled out his phone and began recording quietly, his thumbs moving swiftly to capture the moment. Margaret noticed and bristled. "Seriously? You're recording this? For what?" "For accountability," he replied, his tone calm but edged with determination. "People should see this." "No." Margaret scoffed, crossing her arms. "Oh, please. This is just a spoiled teenager thinking she can get whatever she wants." That struck a nerve. A woman sitting nearby, dressed in scrubs, finally spoke up. "It's not about the seat," she said firmly. "It's about how you're treating her." The tension shifted again, like ice cracking underfoot. Margaret's gaze darted around the car, searching for an ally, but most passengers either avoided her eyes or looked back with quiet judgment. Her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Emma, sensing the weight of the moment, took a deep breath. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tremble in her chest. "I just wanted to sit down." Her words were simple but carried a weight that silenced the murmurs in the car. As the train jolted into the next station, a few passengers shuffled off, and more stepped on. The subway car remained charged with tension. Just as Emma moved to steady herself against a pole, a woman in a business suit, who had been quietly observing, stood up. "Take my seat," the woman said, her voice firm but kind. "You deserve better than this." Emma hesitated for a moment, then nodded her thanks. She sank into the seat with a quiet sigh of relief, her composure intact despite the emotional weight of the encounter. Margaret, meanwhile, sat stiffly, her arms crossed, her purse still clutched tightly. The young man with the phone continued filming, now narrating the scene in a low voice. The subway car had returned to an uneasy quiet, but the moment wasn't over. Margaret. The tension lingered as the train continued its journey, but something had shifted. Emma's quiet defiance, the businesswoman's simple act of kindness, and the bystander's decision to record had transformed an everyday moment into something larger. None of them knew it yet, but this encounter would soon ripple far beyond the confines of that subway car, sparking conversations and igniting debates about respect, bias, and the power of standing up, or standing still, for what's right. By the time the subway doors closed behind Emma, the wheels of an entirely different train had been set in motion, the relentless engine of social media. The young man's recording, which captured Emma's quiet defiance and Margaret's dismissive behavior, found its way online within hours. The video began to circulate on platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, shared by passengers who had witnessed the scene firsthand. The hashtags started small: Subway Showdown, Accountability Matters, and Respect All. But as the video gained traction, those hashtags became trending topics, igniting conversations that spanned far beyond the Washington, D.C. subway. The footage, just over 2 minutes long, told a story without needing much explanation. Emma stood tall, her calm resolve speaking volumes, while Margaret's defensive and entitled behavior unfolded clearly on screen. The contrast between them was striking. Social media users reacted swiftly. Comments poured in beneath the posts, expressing everything from admiration for Emma's composure to scathing critiques of Margaret's actions. "Wow, this girl has so much grace under pressure. She's going places," one commenter wrote. "This is exactly what's wrong with the world. People like Margaret who think they can act however they want," another added. Others shared personal stories of experiencing similar prejudice or witnessing it in their own lives. The video became a mirror, reflecting deeply ingrained biases and sparking debates about accountability, privilege, and the importance of standing up or standing still against injustice. Within hours, the video reached tens of thousands of views, then hundreds of thousands. News outlets picked it up, framing it as a snapshot of modern-day courage and entitlement. The hashtags evolved into rallying cries, with users sharing their own moments of quiet defiance and kindness, using Accountability Matters. While Emma's quiet strength was celebrated, Margaret faced a very different reality. At first, Margaret was oblivious to the storm brewing online. She went about her day as usual, unaware that her actions on the subway had been captured and broadcast to the world. It wasn't until her phone began buzzing incessantly in the segments followed by newspaper reports, notifications, missed calls, and texts from friends and acquaintances that she realized something was wrong. Confused, she opened her social media accounts and froze. Her face was everywhere, alongside captions that left no room for ambiguity. Entitled Woman Blocks Teen from Sitting, Subway Karen Exposed, and When Prejudice Goes Viral. The comments were relentless, each one like a blow. This is the kind of behavior that holds us back as a society. She's the reason we need these conversations about privilege. Margaret tried to brush it off at first, telling herself it was just a mob mentality. They don't know me, she muttered. But the backlash spilled into her real life. At her job as a legal secretary, whispers followed her through the office hallways. A meeting with her manager revealed the depth of the damage. Clients had seen the video and were complaining about her association with the firm. "We can't afford this kind of attention," her manager said bluntly. Margaret was placed on leave until things calmed down, she added. And if anything calms down, her personal life wasn't spared either. At the grocery store, she felt the weight of lingering stares and heard whispers behind her back. A woman in line muttered loudly enough for Margaret to hear, "That's the subway lady." Margaret abandoned her cart and left, her face flushed with shame. Her daughter, a college student, called her in tears. "Mom, why didn't you just let her sit?" she asked, the disappointment cutting deeper than any online comment. For days, Margaret stayed holed up in her home, blinds drawn and phone notifications silenced. She replayed the subway encounter in her head, searching for ways to justify her actions. But each time, the justifications felt thinner, flimsier. The mirror social media had held up to her actions forced Margaret to confront an uncomfortable truth, one she had avoided for years. Meanwhile, Emma experienced the aftermath differently. While she was initially unaware of the video, a tagged post from a classmate brought it to her attention. As Emma watched the footage, she felt a mix of emotions: pride, unease, and a sense of exposure. The praise was overwhelming. Strangers hailed her as a role model for her calm demeanor. Messages flooded in, from classmates suddenly eager to be her friend, to reporters requesting interviews. But Emma wasn't sure how to feel. She hadn't intended to become a symbol, she just wanted to sit. The attention felt both affirming and invasive, a spotlight she hadn't asked for but couldn't escape. For Margaret, the public reckoning was a wake-up call. The fallout wasn't just about losing face, it was about losing the sense of herself she had once clung to. The comments, the stares, and the loss of her job forced her to confront not only her actions but also the biases she had long ignored. The video, now a viral sensation, continued to spark conversations across platforms and communities. It wasn't just about Emma and Margaret anymore. It was about a society grappling with the everyday moments that reveal our deepest biases and the courage it takes to challenge them. The fallout for Margaret was severe, but it was also an opportunity. The same social media that exposed her could also serve as a tool for growth and redemption. What she chose to do with it, however, was entirely up to her. For Emma, the subway incident was initially just another awkward and uncomfortable moment in her day. By the time she arrived at school, she had already pushed it to the back of her mind, focusing instead on a science quiz and lunchtime conversations with her friends. It wasn't the first time Emma had experienced dismissive behavior, and she had learned to brush such moments aside. She didn't see herself as extraordinary for standing her ground. To her, it was simply the right thing to do. It wasn't until later that evening, while scrolling through her phone on the couch, that the weight of what had happened began to sink in. A notification from a classmate tagged her in a post. Curious, she clicked on it. The caption read, "Look at this queen staying calm under pressure." As the video played, Emma froze. There she was, standing tall in the subway car, her quiet defiance captured from multiple angles. Her voice, barely audible in the noisy train, carried a calm strength that seemed to resonate with viewers. The comments beneath the video were overwhelming. Strangers praised her composure and strength, while others shared similar experiences of standing up to prejudice or remaining silent and wishing they hadn't. Wow, so much grace for someone so young. This girl is going to change the world someday. She handled herself better than most adults would. Emma's mom, noticing her reaction, leaned over to look at the screen. "Is that you?" she asked, her voice a mix of pride and concern. Emma nodded, her expression uncertain. Her mom placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You handled yourself beautifully. I'm proud of you." Despite her mom's encouragement and the flood of support online, Emma felt conflicted. She was grateful for the kindness and recognition, but she also felt exposed. A moment she thought was private had turned into a public spectacle. People were looking to her for answers, for leadership, for something she wasn't sure she could give. Emma turned to the one thing that had always helped her process her feelings: writing. Late that night, she sat at her desk, her notebook open to a blank page. She began to write not for the public, but for herself. She wrote about the subway, the tension she felt, and the decision to stand still when everything around her urged her to move. She wrote about the unease of being seen, the weight of being heard, and the quiet power of staying true to herself. But what started as private reflection soon became something more. Her mom encouraged her to share her words online, and Emma hesitated at first. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Just speak your truth," her mom said gently. "People are listening because you stood up for yourself. That's powerful." Emma's first post was short but impactful. Sometimes standing still is the loudest thing you can do. Accompanying her words were a few paragraphs reflecting on her experience and what it meant to be seen and heard. Her post quickly gained traction, striking a chord with thousands. Stories began pouring in from people around the world, moments of quiet defiance, resilience, and standing up to bias. A man from California shared how he had been denied service at a diner in the 1970s, but stayed silent, wishing he had spoken up. A teenage girl from Texas wrote about being asked to leave a lunch table at school because her kind didn't belong there. Emma's words had sparked a conversation far bigger than herself. Soon, local organizations invited her to speak at community events. At first, she was nervous. She preferred to express herself through writing rather than speaking, but with her mom's encouragement, Emma agreed. At one event, she stood in front of a crowd, her notebook in hand, and read an excerpt from her writing. "I didn't want to be a symbol," she said. "I just wanted to sit. But sometimes what we want doesn't matter as much as what we need to do. I stood still because I couldn't move forward otherwise." The audience erupted in applause. Emma's voice had become a quiet but powerful force in the ongoing conversations about respect, accountability, and resilience. Though she didn't seek fame, Emma embraced her role as a voice for change. Her story wasn't just about her. It was about the countless others who had faced similar moments and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Her journey was only beginning, but it was already inspiring others to find their own courage and speak their truths. In the days following the viral subway video, Margaret, once so sure of her actions, found herself at the center of an overwhelming backlash. At first, she was defensive, clinging to the justifications she had repeated in her mind since the incident. "I was protecting my space," she muttered to herself, scrolling through the countless critical comments on her social media accounts. But the more she read, the harder it became to maintain her sense of righteousness. Stories from strangers poured in under the video accounts of discrimination and exclusion that mirrored her own behavior. For the first time, Margaret began to see herself not as a victim of public scrutiny, but as part of a larger problem. The realization didn't come all at once. It started with small cracks in her defenses, moments when she couldn't ignore the truth reflected back at her. The public's reaction wasn't just about her refusal to move her bag. It was about what her actions represented. It was a painful mirror, one that forced her to confront the biases she had carried for years without question. Margaret's turning point came during a conversation with her daughter. "Mom, why didn't you just let her sit?" her daughter asked, her voice tinged with disappointment. "I can't explain this to my friends. You're better than this." The words stung more than any online comment. Margaret realized she didn't want her daughter to see her as someone incapable of change. Determined to do better, Margaret took her first steps toward accountability. She enrolled in a local workshop on implicit bias, held at a nearby community center. Walking into the room filled with strangers, Margaret felt exposed and vulnerable, as though everyone knew who she was. The workshop was uncomfortable at first. Listening to others share their experiences of being excluded or dismissed forced Margaret to confront the impact of her actions. She began to see how her behavior on the subway wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of assumptions and privilege. Over time, Margaret became a regular attendee at the workshops, immersing herself in uncomfortable but necessary conversations. She also began volunteering at the community center, helping organize events that fostered understanding and inclusion. One of her first tasks was sorting through notebooks filled with stories written by local teens. Among them was a story by Emma, the girl from the subway. Reading Emma's words brought tears to Margaret's eyes. The quiet courage Emma described was undeniable, and it left Margaret feeling both humbled and inspired. Encouraged by the community center staff, Margaret reached out to Emma through a mutual acquaintance. It wasn't an easy decision. She wasn't sure how Emma would respond, or if she even wanted to hear from her. But Margaret knew that accountability required more than private reflection. It required action. When the meeting finally happened, it was brief but meaningful. Margaret sat across from Emma at a small cafe, her hands folded nervously around her cup. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Margaret began, her voice steady but soft. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to apologize for how I treated you. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that day and what it says about me. I'm trying to do better." Emma, ever thoughtful, nodded. "I appreciate that," she said. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, but it's a start. What matters is that you're willing to grow." Their conversation wasn't long, but it planted seeds of understanding that neither of them could have imagined in that crowded subway car. For Margaret, the journey didn't end with an apology. She continued attending workshops, volunteering, and learning. Over time, her actions spoke louder than her initial defensiveness ever could. She even began sharing her story at community events, admitting her mistakes and encouraging others to confront their own biases. For Emma, the meeting reinforced her belief in the power of standing firm and speaking truthfully. Margaret's willingness to change showed her that even the most uncomfortable moments could lead to growth. The ripple effect of their story extended far beyond them. It wasn't just about Margaret's transformation or Emma's quiet strength. It was about the conversations their encounter sparked. It was about the possibility of change, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable, when we choose to face our biases and take steps toward understanding. In the end, Margaret's journey wasn't about redemption. It was about responsibility. And through her willingness to confront her own biases and grow, she became part of a larger movement toward accountability and kindness, one step at a time. Emma's quiet defiance on the subway resonated far beyond the confines of that train car. The video of her encounter with Margaret became more than just a viral moment. It sparked a movement. As the story spread, people from all walks of life began sharing their own experiences of prejudice, resilience, and the courage to stand up against injustice. One woman wrote about confronting a coworker who routinely dismissed her ideas during meetings, inspired by Emma's ability to stand firm. A high school student shared how he spoke up when he saw a classmate being excluded in the cafeteria, crediting Emma's story for giving him the confidence to act. These weren't grand, sweeping acts of heroism, but small, everyday moments of bravery that collectively created a ripple effect of change. The societal response was equally significant. Conversations about implicit bias and accountability took center stage in online forums, classrooms, and even corporate boardrooms. Schools organized discussions on respect and inclusion, using Emma's story as a catalyst for open dialogue. Community centers hosted workshops, inviting people to share their own experiences and explore ways to foster kindness and understanding in their daily lives. These changes, while subtle, marked a shift in perspective. Emma's refusal to back down highlighted the power of small actions to challenge ingrained behaviors and attitudes. Her story reminded people that accountability isn't just about calling others out. It's about reflecting on our own actions and making space for those who are often overlooked or dismissed. The lesson was clear. Real change begins in the moments that seem insignificant at first. It's in the decision to offer a seat, to speak up when something feels wrong, or to listen when someone shares their truth. These small choices, repeated over time, can shift mindsets and create a more equitable and empathetic world. For those inspired by Emma's courage, the call to action is simple. Reflect on your own biases, challenge them, and make space for others. Whether it's in a crowded subway car or your everyday interactions, your actions matter. As Emma herself wrote, "Sometimes the hardest thing is to speak up. Other times, it's to stand still and let the silence speak for you. But either way, the courage to face what's wrong and make it right is what changes the world." Let Emma's story remind us all that even the smallest stands can make a difference. Together, we can create a ripple effect of kindness, accountability, and change, one moment at a time. Emma's story is a powerful reminder of the importance of courage, accountability, and kindness in our everyday lives. What began as a simple act of standing her ground in a subway car became a symbol of resilience and the ripple effect of small but meaningful actions. Her quiet defiance and the conversations it sparked show us that change often starts in the most ordinary moments. In a world where biases and injustices can feel overwhelming, Emma's actions demonstrate that even a single person can inspire others to reflect, speak up, and do better. Accountability doesn't just mean calling out others. It also means looking within, challenging our assumptions, and creating space for respect and understanding. We all have a role to play in building a more equitable and compassionate world. Whether it's standing up for someone who's being overlooked, offering kindness to a stranger, or simply listening to perspectives different from our own, these small acts matter. Now it's your turn. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on how you can create positive change in your own life. Share your own experiences of courage and resilience in the comments. Challenge the biases you encounter and encourage others to do the same. Together, we can amplify stories like Emma's and build a community that values accountability, kindness, and respect. If this story inspired you, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life narratives that make a difference. Let's continue sharing these moments that remind us of our shared humanity, because together we can create a better world, one story at a time.